What it do was good, YouTube. It's your boy Dre here, and we back with another reaction video. I'm just at that save point where I could say we back, but today we're back to the usual, man. Back to reacting to disturbing cases. I know it might be hard to watch for some folks out there, but it's interesting, and it's also interesting to see what happens to the suspect after all the gruesome crimes that they have committed. So if you're new here, leave a like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe. On our way to 200 subscribers, we're at 120. We've been here, I know it's my fault, we've been here for a minute, okay? But yeah, man, without further ado, I'm not gonna hold you guys up for too long. Let's go ahead and get into this video. I'm gone. Alright, so the case that we're reacting to today is the disturbing case of Janine Balding. It's posted by the creators of Disturbing, I don't know. Go show them love. Their link will be below in the description. Much love to them for making this amazing video. Let's get into it. If you guys hear my stomach, just don't mind it, okay?
This case takes place in Sydney, Australia, in the year 1988.
Just haven't eaten yet.
In 1986, the country of Australia was outraged by the brutal death of Anita Cobby. Anita was walking home from a night out when she was kidnapped near a quiet train station by a number of men who pulled her into the car and then dragged her into a field. These men then committed what is considered to be one of the very worst crimes in Australian history. The murder of Anita was horrendous and especially cruel. There are even rumours that much of what happened to her was suppressed by the media and police as to not anger and disturb the country more than they already were. Some of you may be familiar with this case, as I did cover it just a few months ago. Australia hoped that no such case would ever happen again, but just 2 years later, a similar case would take place, yet again sparking outrage and galvanising the public to seek justice for the victim. Janine Balding was a 20-year-old woman who lived in Sydney, New South Wales. 20. Janine was born on the 7th of October 1967. She was raised in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales, which at the time had a population of around 40,000. Janine had a happy upbringing. She was close with her mother and father, and she had 3 other siblings. Her parents would later recall Janine in her younger years. They said they couldn't remember a time when she wasn't smiling. They said their daughter was incredibly happy and bubbly, and had a number of loyal and close friends in her youth. Janine enjoyed her time in Wagga Wagga, but as she got older, she wanted something more exciting. She wanted to move to a bigger city. Janine's older sister had been living in Sydney for a few years, and Janine desperately wanted to move and join her big sister in a city that had more going on. So when she finished her studies, she made the decision to move with the full support of her friends and family. Janine's sister was living in their family's holiday home right by the ocean in Cronulla, so Janine already had a place lined up to live. She arrived in Sydney and began looking for a job, and fairly quickly she was able to find employment with a bank on George Street, one of Sydney's busiest streets. Not long after moving to Sydney, Janine met a man by the name of Stephen Moran. The two hit it off right away, and they began a relationship. Things were going so well, in fact, that the two became engaged. Her family would later recall that she was incredibly excited about this new chapter of her life. The two bought their own house together in Berkeley Vale. The couple spent a good chunk of their savings on purchasing the property, so they planned to rent out the home until their wedding day as a means to finance their wedding. And once they were married, the two would move in together and begin their own family. But until that day came, Janine stayed living in Sydney with her sister. On the morning of the 8th of September 1988, Janine made her way to work. She had stayed in her fiancé's house the night before, so she drove to Sutherland Station and left her car in the car park and took the train into Sydney to work. This decision would soon result in her untimely death, as on this day, a gang of thugs created horrific plans to abduct someone in that very station. This gang included Matthew Elliott, a 16-year-old who was described as an uncontrollable youth who ran away from his home in the western suburbs of Sydney. He had spent the vast majority of his teenage years in and out of institutions, and not for minor crimes.
Bro, 16?
He had an extensive criminal record for someone of his age. This included arson, breaking and entering, assault, and theft. Another was 22-year-old Shorty Jameson. Shorty had the mental capacity of a 10-year-old, and
Whoa.
he too had an extensive criminal record, including SA, malicious wounding, and robbery. Then there was Bronson Blessington, 14. He left his home when he was around 9 and spent most of his time on the streets of Sydney. He was often in trouble with the police for petty thefts. And finally, there was Wayne Wilmot, who was 15. He had a criminal record when he was still in the single digits. His criminal record included dozens of essays, assaults, stealing, and theft. He
And
had been
single
placed into
digits.
various foster homes, but he just preferred to live on the streets. Wayne also had a girlfriend, 15-year-old Carol Arrow. She had run away from her country home too, and she had stopped in Sydney. Carol had learning difficulties, and she would often associate with people who would take advantage of her. On the morning of the 8th of September 1988, the gang all met up and began talking about the crimes each of them had committed, bragging about which one had committed the worst act. Then
That's
Bronson
insane.
uttered some of the most vile words I have ever covered on the channel. He said, "Let's go get a Sheila and ape her." Of course, the usual
Yep.
reaction to such a
I know what the
suggestion
word
would be
means.
disgust, but not for this gang. They actually believed this to be a good idea.
Bro.
None of them thought much about the moral implications of such a vile act, and they agreed to set out and do their best to bring the idea into fruition. As I mentioned earlier, the murder of Anita
Disgusting,
Cobby
bro.
was still in the minds of many in Sydney, and it was in the minds of this gang. They knew that the best opportunity they would have would be to target a lone woman near a train station in the dead of night, just like what happened to Anita Cobby. So the gang made their way from Central Station to Sutherland Railway Station, the place where Janine had parked her car earlier that day. This particular spot would be a criminal's dream. It had parking spots in secluded areas that would be out of view from the public. During the train journey to Sutherland Station, the gang attempted to intimidate other passengers. They threatened a number of students on the train, telling them that if they did not give up their seats, they would smash their heads in. Shorty Jameson even
Insane.
found a lone woman on the train and tried his best to make her feel as uncomfortable as possible. He kept showing her an adult magazine and repeated vulgar phrases to her. The gang finally reached their destination at around 5 p.m. They waited at the station to find a victim, and it wouldn't be long until they did. 19-year-old Christine had just arrived at the car park right alongside the station. She walked towards her vehicle and searched her bag for her car keys. She opened the door, but just before she would get inside, she heard a noise. She
No.
turned around to see one of the gang members standing there, looking rather suspicious. She got into her car as the gang members approached. One of them asked Christine what the time was, and she replied, 20 past 5. Christine knew that something was off. She became worried as flashbacks of Anita's murder came to mind. She locked her car doors and began driving out of the parking lot, but as she did, one of the gang stepped in front of her car to make Christine stop.
Boy, I would have ran him
He
over.
walked down the side of the car and asked Christine for some money.
Right,
But as he
bro,
asked
just
this,
drive
Christine
off.
spotted a knife in his hand that he was trying to hide.
Speed off.
Christine wasted no time. She sped away and got home as quickly as she could.
Nice.
She was terrified and wondered what exactly she had just escaped from.
Bro, how do y'all
She
know all
arrived
this
home
info?
in a frantic state and told her fiancé everything that had just occurred. Her fiancé was deeply worried and suggested they go to the police right away and inform them of what had happened.
Oh,
So
that's
they
how.
drove to the police station and gave a statement to some officers. The officers said that they would look into the matter, but they didn't dispatch any officers to the location.
Of course
The
they
couple
didn't.
left somewhat disappointed in the lack of urgency shown by the police, so they decided to drive by the station on their way home to see if the
No.
gang was still there. Around this
That's a
time,
horrible
Janine
idea.
had just arrived at the car park and was heading to her car.
Oh.
Christine and her fiancé pulled up at the station to see Janine in her recognizable bank uniform being accosted by the gang. Christine's fiancé had a badly broken leg. He was in no condition to fight off 4 males, especially knowing that at least one of them had a knife. They decided that the best thing to do would be to drive as quickly as possible back to the police station and inform them that the gang was still operating in the area and had a potential victim.
Y'all don't own no handguns?
Fiancé turned the car around and headed straight back to the station. The police immediately dispatched a number of officers to the scene, and Christine and her fiancé followed closely behind. But by the time they got there, the gang and Janine were gone. As Janine had tried to walk to her car, the gang attacked her. They forced her into the backseat of her own car and quickly drove away from the scene. In the backseat of the car, Matthew Elliott forced himself upon Janine as Bronson held a knife to her throat and threatened her not to fight back. Shorty also did his part in holding Janine down. The gang would later say that Janine begged and pleaded with them to be let free, but they ignored her pleas for mercy. In the driver's seat was Wayne Wilmont, and in the front passenger seat was Carol. Upon hearing the chilling screams and pleas, Wayne told Carol to perform an act upon him. Amidst the attack, Carol pulled out Wayne's privates and did as she was told. The 3 others in the back took turns committing vile acts upon Janine. Using the knife, Elliot sliced off Janine's clothing and threatened that he would cut her if she tried to do anything. They stuck Janine's clothing into her mouth so she wouldn't be able to make as much noise. They drove Janine's car for nearly an hour into the western suburbs, with each minute being described in court as hell on earth for Janine, as she was beaten and repeatedly essayed at knife point. One of the gang then said, "It's a nice night for a murder." They all began laughing and joking that they should kill her. One of the boys then suggested a location that he knew of that would be quiet, and that this would be the perfect spot to kill Janine without anyone seeing.
Disgraceful.
He suggested a small dam near the main road that they were driving on. The gang pulled up at the area where the dam was located. Bronson, Shorty and Matthew dragged Janine towards the water. She tried her best to resist and fight them, but she was powerless against 3 males. Janine was pushed over a fence where she broke her wrist quite badly, making it even harder to fight back. Meanwhile, Wayne and Carol stayed in the car and continued to do what they were doing before. They had little interest in the fate of Janine and just how much she was suffering. The 3 others dragged Janine out of the sight of any potential passers-by or cars, and they continued to essay her again. Janine screamed out, so one of them grabbed her scarf and used it to silence her as the rest of her clothing was removed. After the 3 felt as if they were done with Janine, they realized that if they were to let her go, she would be able to tell the police everything and they would be caught. They all agreed that they needed to kill Janine. One of them went back to the car whilst the other 2 guarded Janine so she couldn't escape. They looked inside Janine's car for anything they could use to kill her. They found some rope and then returned to Janine and the 2 others. The 3 hogtied her. Janine's feet were tied together, and then the rope was wrapped around her neck and
she just hog-tied naked in the woods.
The rope was then wrapped under her knees again and pulled even tighter. The position would have been extremely painful and made it very hard to
broken
breathe.
wrist.
Janine was then dragged into the waters of the dam and drowned. The gang would later recall that it took some time for her to finally pass away. But once they knew she was dead, they decided to take all of her jewelry, including her engagement ring. They also looked in Janine's purse and found her bank cards, along with a piece of paper with all of her PIN numbers written on it. The 3 rejoined Carol and Wayne in Janine's car, and they drove away from the horrendous crime scene. But as they were making their getaway, Janine's car broke down. The gang abandoned it on the side of the road.
Something went wrong with their fucking plan.
The gang then used Janine's cars to withdraw hundreds of dollars, and they shared it amongst themselves.
Go back. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
To withdraw the side of the road and walked the rest of the way. The gang then used Janine's cards to withdraw hundreds of dollars, and they shared it amongst themselves. Now on this night, Janine was supposed to be staying at her fiancé's home, as that's why she had parked in the station that she had been abducted in. When she didn't return home as planned, Steve thought little about this. He simply believed that she had finished late or that she had made other plans and had stayed with her sister for the night.
She would have called you. That's your
The
fiance,
police
buddy.
received a phone call. Someone had spotted what appeared to be an abandoned car. Officers were dispatched to the location, and what they found raised some suspicion. There was evidence that something was horribly wrong. Underwear were found in the back seat, and not far from the car was a handbag which appeared to have been ransacked. The car's registration was linked to Janine's name, so they decided to call Janine's place of residence to see if she was okay. Janine's sister had been staying at her boyfriend's home that night, so she had no idea if her sister had made it home the night before. She quickly checked the flat they shared, but Janine was nowhere to be seen. They contacted her fiancé Stephen, who told the police that he had not seen her either, but that she was supposed to come back to his place the night before, but he assumed she had just made other plans. Officers then discovered that Janine didn't make it into work. Janine's parents were contacted back in Wagga Wagga, and they were asked if they had seen Janine, but they too had not. It was clear that something horrible had happened, and Janine was reported missing. An investigator was assigned to the disappearance, the very same lead investigator who had worked on the case of Anita Cobby, although it wouldn't take long to find the twisted individuals who were responsible for her death. The very same evening that Janine was reported missing, Matthew and Bronson were arrested by police. A social worker at the homeless accommodation they were staying in overheard the boys talking about a car they had stolen. The police were immediately called, and the two boys were arrested. They were questioned by investigators, but initially, the boys were only going to be questioned about the carjacking. But as soon as the officers sat them down, one of the boys pulled out of his pocket a switchblade knife and told officers that they had information on a missing woman. The two boys concocted a tale that some of their friends had murdered a young woman, and they said they could show the officers where the body was.
They cried.
The investigators took the boys up on their offer. They hopped into a vehicle and made their way to the dam where Janine had been murdered, and there they found the horrific crime scene. Janine's family were called, and they were told the devastating news. But Janine's mother and father wanted to make sure it was really her. They went to the morgue and confirmed their worst fears. The body was indeed their beloved daughter. It goes without saying that the family were distraught with grief. They just couldn't figure out why anyone would want to harm Janine. She had no enemies, and she was friendly to everyone she met.
Psychos,
this
man.
is something that I found to be incredibly touching. Janine's family were about to enter a nightmare that another family were all too familiar with. Anita Cobby's parents, Gary and Grace, couldn't bear the thought of someone else having to go through what they went through with no guidance. They decided to reach out to Janine's family and offered them some much-needed support. They told them what to expect in the coming days, how to navigate the relentless media, and how the court proceedings would work. Gary and Grace were with the family every step of the way, something that gave them some much-needed comfort in such horrific times. Janine's family were incredibly grateful to just have some people who truly understood what they were going through. Meanwhile, Matthew and Bronson were being questioned further, and they provided true details of the killers and kidnappers. A warrant was issued for Carol Arrow and Wayne Wilmont. The couple were quickly found in King's Cross, and they were arrested. A nationwide manhunt was conducted looking for Shorty. Shorty Jameson is a rather odd-looking individual and stands out amongst a crowd. His mother had consumed alcohol and illegal substances before he was born, and this severely impacted him. He was quickly found and arrested in Queensland. All five were questioned about the murder. They all gave a similar story, but they all denied being the one who actually killed Janine.
Of course.
They all claimed that an individual by the name of Scott Agus was the one who truly was responsible for the murder. Scott was arrested and questioned by the police. He denied any involvement and seemed to be genuinely confused. He was able to provide a solid alibi. He had been with a number of social workers when the crime occurred, and this was confirmed. Scott was released by the officers when they became convinced that he played no role whatsoever.
It's that
The
group
evidence
y'all
for the other
captured.
5 being involved was overwhelming. At this time, DNA evidence was still in its infancy. The United Kingdom was one of the leaders in this technology, so samples were taken of the 5 and were sent off to the UK to be tested. The DNA evidence found inside Janine implicated Bronson and Matthew, but not Shorty. A number of witnesses came forward and remembered seeing the gang covered in dirt and mud. They were using a bank card to withdraw money at the time. Christine, the first woman to be harassed by the gang, was brought in as a witness. She was immediately able to pick out a number of the gang members in a police lineup. Wayne and Carol's fingerprints were found in Janine's car, linking them to the crime. The knife used in the attack was also traced to a shop. The owner of the shop was shown images of the gang, and he was able to identify Matthew as the one who purchased the blade. And when Carol was arrested, she was found to be wearing Janine's watch. Despite having no DNA evidence against Shorty, plenty of witnesses came forward, and they distinctly remembered seeing him with the gang before and after the murder. He was picked out numerous times. When Christine had heard the news about Janine, she was distraught. She beat herself up, believing that she should have done more to save her. But Janine's parents assured
seen it
her
before it
that she
happened.
had nothing to be sorry for, and that she did everything she could by alerting the police. The trial would soon begin. Janine's mother Beverly bravely said that she would attend every single day of the trial. She wanted to know exactly what these monsters had done to her daughter. The court was presented with the horrific details of the crime, how Janine begged to be saved, how she tried to fight back, and how she was essayed multiple times at knife point. Beverly heard it all, in what I can imagine must have been unbelievably traumatic. As the details of the case were read out, the gang began to laugh, and they made a number of jokes. They would often shout out and jeer as the jury and the rest of the court looked at them in pure disgust. But the trial would soon have to be put to an end temporarily, causing much stress to the family. The gang decided to change their story and claimed that Shorty Jameson wasn't actually present at the murder, and that it was actually another person who was also called Shorty. They identified another homeless man named Mark Shorty Wells as their accomplice. Mark Shorty Wells was a schizophrenic and a self-described Satanist. He was tracked down in Brisbane more than a year after the murder. In court, it became clear that he knew some of the details of the murder, but he said that the reason he knew these details was because he had a dream during a seance. Eventually, Mark Shorty Wells was acquitted of any wrongdoing, and the second trial was now to be held. However, before this happened, the charges against Carol Arrow were dropped, as she was found to have serious mental deficiencies. Wayne Wilmont entered a plea, as the police accepted that he stayed in the car with Carol during the time of the murder. He was sentenced to 10 years. Evidence cementing Shorty Jameson's involvement in the crime was brought before the court. He had bragged to another prisoner about the crime, stating that he would do it again if he was ever given the chance. This prisoner testified against him in court. Stephen Shorty Jameson, Matthew Elliott, and Bronson Blessington were all found guilty of the murder of Janine Balding. The public were furious. They wanted the death sentence for all three, or at least life without parole, and the public got what they wanted. All three were sentenced to life without the possibility of ever being released. The killers, even to this day, do their best to appeal the sentence. Beverly attended every single appeal and did her best to ensure that these monsters who killed her daughter would never, under any circumstances, ever be released. Wayne Wilmont, who was given 10 years, was let out after serving 7 years. He would go on to essay another further 4 women, and was sentenced to for these crimes. He was ordered to attend a course to show the damage SA has done to people, but during this course, he exposed himself to a nurse and tried to attack his therapist after he told the therapist that Janine got what she deserved. Wayne is one of the few people in Australian history not to have been convicted of murder, but still deemed far too dangerous to ever be released. In 2019, psychological assessments were conducted on Wayne. He was found to have an IQ of just 74. He was found to be highly callous, manipulative, and deceptive, traits consistent with a psychopath. The others also still remain in prison, where hopefully they will
74
stay
IQ.
until their final days. However, Bronson insists he is a changed man, and that he has found God. He has been speaking and writing to an Anglican minister named Simon Manchester every week for the past 12 years. Reverend Manchester believes that he is now rehabilitated, and is deeply remorseful for his part in the murder of Janine. The Reverend said in an interview, "I think that what he did was horrendous, and if I was the Balding family, I don't know how I would cope. But I have observed him for over 12 years, and he is a genuine believer." Despite the claims that Bronson has turned his life around, the Balding family have never received an apology from him.
Exactly.
Janine's brother doesn't believe for 1 second that Bronson is genuinely changed, and went on to say about his religious conversion, "If he thinks he's going to the same heaven as my sister, he's mistaken." The case of Janine Balding shook Australia to its core, much like the case of Anita Cobby. It can't be understated just how much of a hero Janine's mother Beverly is. Despite it being incredibly painful, she fought to the end of her days to make sure justice was kept for her daughter, attending every hearing and appeal, and helping to push for legislation to prevent such criminals from ever being released. Beverly passed away in 2015. She is buried alongside
What a great woman Beverly was, man. Attending every appeal for them to get released, making sure they don't. I would have did the same. Let me go to full screen, guys. We're gonna digest this video here. Alright, YouTube, that is the ending to this video, man. It really was a crazy case, very disturbing. Just a group of fucking under 16-year-olds. The motherfucker was 20, but the guy that looks 20 is the shortest out of the whole group. Now, what makes me frustrated is that the male and that you know, that couple that drove past seeing Janine being harassed by the, you know what I'm saying, the gang. You seeing a couple kids under 16 and you're scared because one has a knife. They're kids. Attack the one with the knife. Bro, the shortest one has the knife. They said Jameson has the knife, bro. Jameson is nothing but 5'1", 5'2" on a good day. I'm running a 4-4 flat and I'm trucking that little man. And I'm beating up his homies. But that's neither here nor there. This video, I want to show support to the creator who made this video. Great edits, great storytelling, great information. Everything was amazing. RP to Janine and her mother, Beverly. Two amazing women. Still feel horrible for Janine. You know, just imagine you in Janine's shoes, thinking, oh, you don't even know this could have been your last day. You about to just go to your car and think you about to go home and go see your fiance, but no, a gang comes up out of nowhere, attacks you, and now you're in hell. Not literally, but that car ride was hell. That kidnapped car ride was hell. That's basically. But yeah, on our way to 200 subscribers. Leave a like on this video if you liked it. Comment what you think about this case. Without further ado, it's been your boy Dre, and I'm going.